Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me and Rachel on this incredible evening. And we're just so thrilled that finally we could sit together and have this conversation. Thank you very much. I hope that you would be so encouraged by this time that we're spending together having this chat. So, Rachel is a friend of mine who I work with. I have a privilege of calling her my sister and my friend. And she is an apologist, she's an evangelist, she is a girls' rights advocate, and she has an incredible heart also for making sure that the gospel that she proclaims is also the gospel that is present in people's lives. She is such an incredible leader and respected voice in her community. She's also the director for Ufahari Girls Ministries that basically focuses on teaching, mentoring children in Kalerwe. Rachael is obviously here just to share her story and some of her experiences. And more importantly for me and for you is to just get a sense of how does she make sense, firstly, of her context and how God is calling her and using her in that very complex setup. And so I just thought that it would be so lovely if Rachel could just start us off by introducing herself so we can get a grasp of who this amazing lady is.
Hi, it's so lovely to be here, and thank you so much, Lucy. I am so privileged to have you as a sister and a friend and as a colleague. I definitely learn a lot from you. Your wisdom, your grace, your intelligence. I mean, you know, the whole package. Yeah. When I'm telling everyone, I'm like, I have cool friends, and then I show you up. So.
No, you're my cool friend. You're my cool friend.
So when I'm telling everybody, yeah, so delighted to be here. I'm Rachael Mutesi, and I think what you need to know about me has been said. Yeah, I'm a girls advocate, and I am from Kalerwe, which is a slum in Kampala. And I am born again. I love Jesus, and I love children, and I love particularly defending the rights of girls. And I find myself doing a lot of that. I tend to call it meddling in people's business. Yeah, I think that's what I do best.
Well, yeah. I mean, Rachel, you share such incredible stories whenever you speak about your context, and I think obviously now we are all experiencing a very strange circumstance, isn't it, across the continent, across the world, where we are all under lockdown. And if you had seen my talk, my conversation with Amy, we're just talking about how there are so many similarities, but at the same time there's so many nuances that each context brings, right? Like, for instance, you can have a country that experiences so many different ways of this lockdown. Sorry, it has so many different experiences, sorry, of the lockdown, right? And so I just wanted to just talk to you about some of the different ways that it's being experienced there, you personally, and some of the stuff you observed there in Kalerwe.
Yeah, I mean, the lockdown itself has been hard. I think Kalerwe being a slum, we've always had problems. I mean, problems of poverty, crime, post-tension, like name it, we've had it. And I think, that's where I've lived all my life. I've lived this life, but I think I've never experienced anything like the lockdown, and I've never been tried and tested like this time of my life. Recently, I was talking to a couple of friends, and I was telling them, and they were saying, "Oh, how are things?" And we were like in a group call, and I was trying to act normal because everyone seemed like, yes, they're in a lockdown, and it seemed like what they're missing is going to the cinema, or they cannot go for a run, or they cannot. And I felt a little bit stupid because I'm like, okay, I want to be happy hearing the news and how this is treating you, but I'm like, actually, for me, it's different. And I remember I didn't say a lot, I said, when the slums are experiencing this differently. Yeah, because it's different. I mean, like the lockdown came with a ban on public transport.
Yeah.
And that meant that people cannot go even to hospital. Like if you're in the slum, an average slum dweller has no car, not even a bicycle. So if you put a ban on public transport, that means that no one can go anywhere,
no one can go,
and especially the sick people cannot go to the hospital. So 2 days into the lockdown, I was helping a woman deliver a baby.
Oh.
And it seemed like, oh, now I have a new vocation, trying to be a midwife, and of course with some friends.
Oh.
And during this season, it's been more like helping pregnant women get to hospital, but then also there are people who live with chronic illnesses, and I have visited many of those. One gentleman who has stage 4 cancer, and I was called to help he get permission to get him to hospital. And we got to hospital. There were about maybe 300 other patients that were waiting for a doctor, and were sleeping outside a tent in the National Referral Hospital. No one tending to them. In fact, we got there and realized it was stupid and took him back home. And a day later, I returned to this community, and I found this guy taking a cup of tea, not because that's what he wanted, but that's all they had, right? And I don't know if I've ever been disturbed in my life. That image, this gentleman had something like stomach cancer, lung cancer, and it grew into the mouth. So he had sores right from the mouth and to underneath. Like he has sores around his mouth. He has his eyes, like, I don't know how they call it. These little airs, like, everything is off, and he's literally like all covered in wounds, and all they can have for him is a cup of tea. And I promise you, I almost drained my account trying to make sure that they get food and all that. So you have scenarios like those. I visited another old lady who had 3 grandchildren who have sickle cell anemia. And they don't even have food, and they can't even go to hospital. And, sickle cell anemia is a strong disease in itself. Now, imagine having 3 grandchildren to an old woman with diabetes, and they can't go anywhere and they don't have food. And so I feel like, yes, I've witnessed suffering before, but not in such a way.
And Rachel, I wanted to ask you, so what you're basically describing is a dire situation before the lockdown, like the sickness that people, or let me say the sense of overwhelm that the health system has had there. This is before there's any COVID-19 outbreaks, and it's not because of COVID-19, but it's pre-existing um, challenges to the health system at that time.
Yeah, I mean, like, yes, these people had these challenges before the COVID-19, but what COVID did is that, because, like, if you have a chronic illness, once in a while you have to go to hospital. For example, if someone has cancer, they need to go for either painkillers or something like that. Or someone with sickle cell anemia, if they're stressed, they're likely to have like a sickle cell crisis.
Yes.
And so what you have is a family that has a sickle cell crisis, but actually they cannot go to hospital. Yeah, because there is a ban on transport. Yes. So it seemed like, yes, there was a problem, but now the problem has been expanded. And it's heartbreaking from whichever way you think about it. And so I just found myself writing a piece, and I was saying to myself, I think I'm becoming a hypocrite, because in the places where I'm supposed to be celebrating another, that's not my reality. This is something different. So I'm thinking, yes, I am supposed to celebrate, but then also the reality of what I'm experiencing. I mean, talk about even violence, in this season, it does not really concur with what my reality is. And so I found myself in a helpless, trying to express what I am thinking and what I'm seeing with the outside world.
I mean, you've already touched on some of the tensions. I was going to ask you to touch on some of those tensions, but you've described them. I mean, if you don't mind just being vulnerable, are there things that you found at this time are draining you way more than they would have because of the situation that you're in and that your community is in? And I mean, one of the things that you're talking about is feeling a sense of being drained by the what is it, like, just the different experiences that people in your life will have, right? Because everyone is is treating everyone differently. The lockdown means other people, it's like, it's a nice time to be at home, have a cup of coffee in the balcony. Now I can think and not be busy. But for some other people, it's also living with 6-8 other people in a small confined space, and they desperately actually need to get out for survival. So you're describing that disparity. But now, on top of that, what kind of tensions do you feel like you are constantly having to navigate?
You've already mentioned that, like, how do you relate with people that,
Mm,
and sometimes some of these people have actually helped, in these situations.
mm,
How do you remain, jovial around them, and at the same time have this weight on you? I'll tell you an experience. 2 days ago, I was talking to a father. So on Sunday, what happened is, one of the boys I've mentored in children's church died to malaria.
oh,
And I listened to the mother say we could not go to hospital and he could not walk.
mm,
And that evening, um, in my we live like in a dormitory, but one of the homes, a gentleman, a couple, they woke up to a dead child, and they said before they went to sleep, the baby had a fever. Now on Monday morning, a friend comes to me and says there is this couple that was fighting, and the gentleman killed the wife, and then the family got angry and killed the guy.
oh,
And so this
yeah,
happens,
you
yeah,
shared
that's on
that.
Thursday. Yeah, yeah. On Thursday, that happens on Monday morning. And
Wow.
then on Tuesday, this guy went to bury their child and he came back and he was trying to explain to me how they lost their child. And I just couldn't take it. I wanted to be, and he was like, you guys were kind, I can't imagine you've been thoughtful like this, but I just couldn't. It was just so much. And yet this is not like my
Mm,
real child, but just the baby was 6 weeks, so I saw the excitement when they brought this baby home. And
yeah.
I've enjoyed that experience with them, and now this. So I think for me the tension is that it's not just a one-off thing.
Mm,
Like you live through this as we're dealing with a cancer patient, and tomorrow the lady with diabetes passes on, then the other day this child is sick.
yeah, yeah.
Just today a friend of mine was calling me saying, oh, I have typhoid but I don't have any coin to myself. Another calls me and says, Rich, I have nothing to eat. Like it's that tension, trying to work with tragedy upon tragedy, and yet
Wow.
keeping your head straight to think of other things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before I go into how you even process that, one thing I've always been intrigued by with you and your story, Rachel, is that uh, like you said, you grew up in Kalerwe, right? And like many of us, well, let me say rather, unlike many of us, normally if you grow up in a tough socioeconomic context and a space where it's just generally under resourced and you are able to, you can go, right? You're out of there and and you go and you live a better life. I was very intrigued by your choice to be rooted in Kalerwe and to make a home there for yourself by choice and to serve the people, your commitment to the people. And that really intrigued me. And so I thought maybe you could just spend a little bit of time just telling us a little bit about you, your upbringing, Kalerwe, because I'm interested to know what kind of story you frame. What was the story that was told about Kalerwe? And what was the story that was told about you personally? But then what's the story now that you are living out?
Wow, that's a hard one. I came to Kalerwe when I was 5 months, and that was shortly when my parents had separated.
Mm,
And I've never asked my mom why, but my grandpa had given me hints on what could have happened. I think my father's family thought my mom was ugly, and she was dark skinned and this tall woman, and they were fair skinned and stuff.
mm,
And I think my mom had a daughter with my father, and I
mm,
think my father had hoped that I could be a boy. I just speculate. I don't know. I don't know if that's the reality of
mm,
how things were. I don't know if it's a clear outcome, but that's what I think. That because I was a child, a female child, and an ugly child.
mm. You're so beautiful. That
So yeah, and so my mom had trained as a nursery teacher then, and one of her cousins worked in Kalerwe at the church school. The church had started a school about a year before this instance, and so my mom moved there, and she was one of the first maybe 3-4 teachers they had. And there in Kalerwe at this church school, there was a store which was a mud house, which was very ramshackle. My mom always says you could look at one side of the house and just literally look through because there were holes. And so there were broken chairs because it was a store, and rats and everything. We lived there with another family. Unfortunately, that lady who we stayed with, also lost her son when we were about 6 years of age. And this place is a swamp, so it would rain. And so the times it would rain, it meant that you would just literally stand in the waters. And many families didn't have a toilet. We had a latrine at the church because it was a church and a school. So we had a latrine, but almost 90% of the village didn't have latrines then. There was no piped water. And so you can imagine if it floods and people are doing open defecation.
Sure.
People do that stuff in peppers and just like literally throw it around. So, and so in those moments, in the early days, people from World Vision, particularly in partnership with the church, came in and they would offer support to the community. And so for me, my childhood experience is people coming from different parts of the world coming into Kalerwe to help. And so they started the school. They help people get clean, piped water. Most of the public latrines that you meet in Kalerwe were given by the church, particularly under World Vision. And so I think as I was growing up, I was seeing people that expressed their faith in a practical way. And for me, that has been like how my Christianity has formed. Understanding Christianity has been, there were people who were known from our place, but they came to help the places. And you know, I became a Christian when I was given food at the age of 9. So I believe in practical expression of love, and because that has been my experience growing up there. But then it didn't, you know, becoming a Christian did not solve all the problems. So I was still exposed to crime, and you know, growing up, it was normal to see someone either being killed or either in violence, or it was normal to see girls gang raped. You know, it wasn't something that was out there, it was within us. And so I grew up in that. And so there has always been a passion to see a change, because I know if I leave and never return, that something is going to happen. And so part of my persuasion to stay there has been that if maybe we stay, we can change the narrative. And so instead of people looking like you asked, you know, what impressions do people have of you? I mean, as long as I've lived, wherever I've gone to different places, in fact, even in some churches here locally, because I do a lot of preaching in churches, and I've had people say, one time actually, a pastor said to me, I thought you were a prostitute, because all I know, the women that come from Kalerwe are prostitutes.
Wow.
And I mean, like, he didn't know. He didn't know how offended I was, but I tried to play it cool. But you know, like, so I'm like, this is the image that someone carries on simply because of my location. And and so you say, yes, my persuasion to go was that, you know, like to be a voice, to see other young people come out, to change the narrative. Because again, for those who know me will know that at least this one is different. So I didn't want to say, oh, only Rachael is different. There should be a group of people that are all different because of what Christ has done in their lives. Yeah. Sorry for the long answer.
No, I'm enjoying it so much, because what you're basically showing people's minds are always gripped by a strong picture of you based on your location, right? And I mean, today, not today, actually, in the last couple of days, my mind is still reeling from the case of the young African American gentleman, Ahmad Aubrey, who was shot while jogging in Georgia. And it really struck me, and I was so tempted to feel numb from the fatigue of it all, because I'm like, but it happens all the time. I'm tired of being so deeply impacted, but at the same time, I know that I can't afford to be tired, because keeping it pain is what keeps us human, right? And then I thought about how, you know, stories of, like, there's a story that the perpetrators of that horrible act of violence and hatred, that what they did, there's a story that they have of people that look a certain way, of Black people in the United States, and then that story drives them in a particular way. There's also stories that that African American communities carry, that we here in Africa we carry, right? Whether it's it's a perception, someone else's perception of us and what we are worth because of that story and all of that. And so I've always been interested now, Rachael, in stories and how they shape people. Emmanuel Katangole speaks of stories as this invisible thing that that captures our imagination so much, and because it's invisible, it's difficult to shake off, and it almost creates the same characters in a narrative because it's invisible. And unless things
Yeah.
are named, unless our theology and our ethics addresses and reveals some of those stories, we can't really move forward and create a better future. And so what I want to ask you now is how have you understood um, your faith as something that gives you legs to pursue a different story for your personal identity, but also for the communal identity and potential of Kalerwe? How is your how have you processed that?
I mean, I'll tell you a song when we're still little. In fact, I learned it from my sister. She,
Mm.
when I was very tiny, and the kids would call me ugly, but she's a good fighter. She would beat anyone who dared to say
I
so.
love I love I love this. I love her.
Yeah, she would. But then as she learned a song earlier because she's older. She had learned this song, and she would sing, "Whose report will you believe?" And she, "We shall believe the report of the Lord." And like she would go, "Whose report will you believe?" And then, "You shall believe the report of the Lord." And I say, "The Lord reports to say, I am free," or whatever you wanted to say. And then would shout that and shout that over and over again. Um, and so I think for me, the thing that changed my identity is discovering who I was in God and what God said about me. And as a teenager, I was in boarding school, but I would wake up every morning and go to a dressing mirror and actually read my stuff, for example, Psalms 139, and read the whole thing. And then afterwards, I would write a letter to myself. you know, um, whatever came to my mind, and many times it would be a response of what someone had said to me. Now the thing is, my sister and I were in the same boarding school. We never told anyone where we were coming from. In fact, when we were in junior high school, we would our school was farther west. Kawempe. Is farther west from the city center, but we'd actually board to from Kawempe, pass by Kalerwe, and go into the city center, and then walk back home because we didn't have enough money to come, because she made sure no one knew where we're coming from, because we knew what that would mean, how people would treat us and stuff. But how we outgrew that is that the more I indulged into Bible study, somehow my view of myself kept on changing. And I just got this amazing confidence in what God spoke of me. And that changed the narrative. That doesn't mean that I've not struggled in some places, but most of my friends will say Rich is fairly a confident person compared to an average, person, whether in Kalerwe or another part of Uganda. So I think, yes, going into scripture and learning that was very important. But then also the other thing I found very important, useful, is being in the right community. I have so many people that love and believe in me and support and pray, and so that's constantly like with me up. So yeah, Winston, for example, your husband will always say, "You're the only sister I recognize," and like that's uplifting in such a way that just seeing who he is and his life and his achievements, and it's like, "You're my sister," that's important. So it's been that. And likewise, because now especially the young women in my community see that and say, "Oh, Richie, God has elevated you in such a way. We want to be like you." So I feel like there is a burden for me to go back and actually say, "You can be like this."
And speaking of mentorship, what drove you to mentorship? Why do you think mentorship is an important tool in terms of reimagine, of helping people actually just reimagine who they could be, that get a sense of agency? Because I think that's the key thing, isn't it? That, like, how do we activate that a new understanding who you're called to be and what the space you occupy could potentially be. And so how did you come to the decision of being a mentor and how is that affecting the community that you are with?
Yeah, like I said, I think I've been lucky to have good people in my life, people that have just walked up to. I remember when I was 19, we had organized a church conference in my community, and we had invited the mission coordinator of the Diocese of Kampala, and he asked me to sing, which is such a terrible thing to ask.
Why would they ask you to do that? But you
Yeah,
probably
man,
made it
when I
little
move the
noisy.
cards, everyone just goes home. Like, what happened? What just happened? But it happened. He just said, and then when I sang, he said the most awkward thing. He said, "When you're the most amazing singer I've ever met in my life." I thought, this is the biggest joke. Yeah, and then afterwards he put me aside and said, in fact, I want you to walk with me, and he's an evangelist. I want you to go with me on missions, and I'm writing a book. Will you be able to type it for me? I've never used a computer at that age, at 19, not even turning it on. He's like, will you help me type my book? I'm like, you're insane. I don't know even how this works. And anyways, he trusted me. And the next weekend, he was speaking at a diocesan conference in one of the dioceses in Southern Coley, one of the big dioceses in the country. And there were very many clergymen, more than 100, and this big congregation of maybe 3,000 people. And shortly before he spoke, it was time for him to speak. He said, my daughter will speak something to you.
Okay.
She will say something, and then I will continue. And she said, you have 40 minutes. I'm like, 40 minutes saying what, and then he's like, this is my first daughter, like he just treated me as a daughter in that space.
Wow.
And I remember feeling so loved and feeling so elevated, but also challenged to step up. And I know he's done that for many young people here in the community. I think in Timothy 2, when Paul is writing in Timothy, he says, the things that you have seen, the things you have heard, pass them to faithful witnesses, the reliable men that will pass them on to others. So there should be a sense of, I'm not going to be here forever.
Yeah.
The only way this can carry on is when we find reliable people that will pass them on to others. And sometimes the reliable men, they may not feel reliable. They may not feel like I'm the right qualified person.
Yeah.
But yet, we're supposed to do that. We're supposed to identify if we're going to advance the kingdom of God. Yeah. So because he looked out for me, and like I said, many people have done that.
Yeah.
I feel indebted to them as a sign of gratitude. I may not see him every day, but as a way of saying thank you to him, then I feel like God is calling me to do that.
Yeah, and to pass that gift of being mentored and cared for forward. I love that so much. And I mean, I think one of the things that I admire so much about you is the resilience of your faith. I love how you are so open about the lament that you have at injustice when you see things not going in a way that would that it's just when things are not okay, you are so vocal, yet you love so deeply and your compassion just runs so deep. I personally really admire you for your resilient faith. How has Jesus been unique in how he's responded to some of your own questions about why you are in an environment where you see all of this? What would you say for you is the key factor in the person of Jesus, for holding you together as a person, as a servant of God? Because I want everybody to just get a glimpse of how you've built resilience in your faith.
I mean, it's trusting him, every day. I was talking to a friend earlier on, and they were telling me about their struggles, and some of the struggles I would relate with. In fact, part of this person's struggle was her relationship with her dad, how he was never there. And I said, that's my story. I don't know if you've watched this movie. I think it's called, is it James Button? It's a Button something, either Richard Button or James Button. But it's basically a young man who was born old. So this woman gives birth to
Benjamin Button.
Benjamin Button, yes,
Yeah.
yes. And so, like, you see, when he's born, the father sees the baby and literally plans to throw them away because they're so ugly, right? And I've wanted to try to poem about this for a long time, but I never seem to put down the words. But I was telling them, I've always felt like that, like when I saw that movie, I think it almost made my story on how maybe my father looked at me and looked like a little Benjamin Button and like, I can't, I can't do with this. And so kind of like disposed away and never expressed interest whatsoever in my life, right? But I think, when you have Jesus, like, it in your heart that he's with you. And so even in the hardest moments where I may struggle to share, it's interesting when you said about lament, because I think I'm terrible when it comes to lamenting. When something is happening, I seem to be the happiest, and people find it hard to connect with me because they're like, oh.
I've seen you be so honest and just say, this is just wrong.
Because I do that very well when writing, but not saying it. Like, I can write about it, but I'll never say it. So even at the biggest tragedy, you find me as the most positive person, and all because I've always seen, like, maybe lament or grief as something weak, something that is not worth expressing. But I found myself write a lot about it as well. But like, so in those moments where it's hard, and the only place I can run to perhaps is my journal, to write about it. I kind of like, God always encourages me either through his word, but also through his presence. And, I love all hymns, and, like, through words of several hymns, like, it is well with my soul and all that, I've always found encouragement in God. And I know that encouragement comes from only him. And so, yeah, it's, I mean, it sounds like, but you will know it for anyone that has been. I was listening to once a gentleman called Wintley Phipps, and he tells a story, and then he says that it's in the quiet crucible of our private personal sufferings that our noblest dreams are born and our greatest gifts are given, and or is given for what we have been through. And for me, that statement, strikes me a lot, that it's in those moments in the crucible the noblest dreams are born. So in the times of agony, in times of crying out, in terms of writing all this hard stuff, I think that's where God is, because he assures us that he will be with us in those moments. And I think for me, it's those moments that, one morning is like, oh, this is terrible. The other morning is like, oh, he is so good. He is so good, because I know it. And he has always been my strength. But then to the example I was raising earlier, his word, he promises that he's faithful.
Yes.
And he's been faithful from the age of 9 till today, almost 21 years working with Jesus, and he's been faithful. I don't, I'm like, why would you love such a person like this, especially when he draws amazing people like you in my life? And I'm like, she wouldn't be here but because of Jesus, she's here. And we have already said, I'm not perfect, but he kind of like gives us that grace to stand.
Yes, thank you, Rachael. And I think my next question, I think I just want us to spend maybe about 10 more minutes, but I feel like we don't have enough time, even because you're such a well, my friend. So, Rach, I'm very, very aware also that a lot of the things that you are seeing now as a community advocate, you're dealing with harsh cases of just cases of injustice and things that are happening to children, where things are just not right, how children are being treated, how women are being treated. And sometimes these things happen within spaces that are supposed to be safe, and spaces that are supposed to be doing right, are supposed to know better. And I can imagine how that sense of betrayal can really treat your heart, or even Rachel, situations like you were saying, seeing tragedy upon tragedy. Can you share maybe one or two, whether it's a scriptural reference or something that you've learned as part of your faith journey that has helped you to be anchored, and to see that part of you doing this work from a place of health is linked to you being a faithful witness to Jesus? So how is your faithful witness to Jesus anchored you in the work that you're doing and caused you to not want to?
Yeah, I mean, firstly is to look at myself and my failings. I think it's easier for us to look at, what other people are doing and, not doing, and judge them. And I am guilty, especially as an advocate. I'm always calling out.
Yeah. Never checking
like
yourself, checking everyone else. That's what I call the external check. You just check.
Yeah. I remember once being summoned to a church council meeting, parish council meeting, and it was decided that I was a problem because I seemed like I was meddling in everyone.
The educator.
And like it can be hard when you find yourself in places and trying to call out. Being vocal when, for example, a child is raped and everyone pretends that has not happened, or in this case where it's been weird in Uganda, particularly, especially for the first days of the lockdown, where pastors were telling their congregations on how to give and not concerned about how these congregations are living, some of the things, I'm quick to say, hey guys, and trying to put my paws out there to get whoever is known. But I think it's good to look at ourselves and what actually scripture tells us, and how we have been saved by grace, and I don't know if I'm a very graceful person, but I try to look around in my circles, and I've received grace, from the people that probably I wouldn't receive grace from. So for me, that has been very important. But I mean, I've always loved that scripture where Paul says, looking at Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. And in Uganda we have a hymn that says tunolira Yesu, tunoliranga Yesu, always look up to Jesus. In these circumstances where maybe I'll tell you, one of my best friend and what I call my twin sister was raped by a pastor. And it was and she did give up on her faith. And I've always asked myself, because I've seen she's very vocal about it in Uganda. She's such, an advocate and an activist for women that have been abused, and she's out there all the time. But one of the things that strikes me is that she has not walked away from faith, and I feel like she had every reason. Because she was a Muslim convert to Christianity, to Christianity. So I'm like, come on, this is too bad. You left the good side and came to the bad side. And yet one thing that has been, constant in her life is that she has looked to Jesus all the time. And so, people like her challenge me to say, and when I examine the life of Jesus, he is faithful. The way he treats, for example, the Samaritan woman, the way he handles that woman caught in adultery, the way he does it with such grace. And if I can learn from him, even just a little bit, I think that's what keeps me going. But then, like I said, when he's leaving, he says, "I will not leave you." Sometimes that the presence is felt through a call from a friend, or that text that says, "I'm thinking about you and I'm loving you." But the truth is, I have not felt let down by him, and I know that's not to say that things have not been hard. I promise you they are, but there has always been a sense of like, he won't. And I know it, and also ask myself, how come I have survived? I have survived all the things until now, and it's because of his grace that has kept me. And so, what do? I try to cling onto him because he's faithful.
Oh, Rachael, that is so beautiful. I love what you said, that it's actually seeing that things are not as in the people that we experience. Say in the case of gender-based violence, the men on earth that we experience, they are not perfect, but keeping the person at the core, at the center of our faith, as the one that we actually seeing as an example for what it is to be human, is actually a better and a healthier option for us. Because if we look at each other, whereas we are also candidates of grace, right? We're being invited to all be fixed, but somehow we probably do place a higher expectation and a higher standard of holiness on each other, and then we keep letting each other down. And I mean, that's not to say that we should excuse acts of violence, and we should excuse indifference to to racism, classism, sexism. However, the one that should actually be the defining voice in terms of whether Christianity is reliable, plausible, or satisfying, is the person of Jesus, because he's the person at the center of our faith. Rachael, your stories have been so enlightening for me, and so deeply encouraging. What would you want to say to people that feel that they don't know how to continue to trust God? Let's say they've been just let down so many times by tough situations around them. I mean, the question of suffering in Africa is just, it's an unrelenting reality, irrespective of where you go live. But there is an unseen like I'm saying, it's a persistent aura of just being chased by tragedy after tragedy, whether it's our economy or being let down by our leaders, or just things not working okay in the home, the psychological condition of our families, right? There's so much trauma that's there. We sit with all of these things. But yet by the grace of God, somehow we emerge and we're still here, right? So many people see these things in our continent and they ask themselves the question, why are Black people still holding on to this thing, right? When it's perpetuated all these things. I know I'm asking you a big question at the end of this. I want you to, could you just give just some words of encouragement in terms of how people can see the way in which maybe you've seen how you can lean into this faith?
The times I look at focus on my problems are the times where I'm at my worst. In fact, every time I spend, let's say, 1 day or 2 days, and I'm not saying in self-care, you have those moments where everything has gone wrong and all you can do is feel sorry for yourself and sit and focus on whatever isn't going right in your life. And for me as an African woman, there's so many things. I'm not married. I've not attained this particular degree. I am not driving this kind of car, and so there is that. But then also there are things that challenge you in every day, and so sometimes I find myself focusing on those, what I have not done, what I would, where I would have been. And the times when that has happened is when I feel terrible. And I think because God is calling me to look one to him, but then to look out for another person, like having compassion on other people. And so I think that sometimes you think you're so much in a bad place until you move out.
Yeah.
I would promise you that when I went to see that cancer guy, my perspective changed. Even at the lockdown, I know it was going to be tough, but then I could put myself in their shoes. And trying to find practical needs, like I went on Facebook and said, can anyone give me a blender? I got 2 blenders in less than an hour. I had, I had 3 nutritionists say we can work around his food. Then I had a doctor call me to say, what is it, which palliative hospital can we take him? Because I was now starting to look beyond myself. And I'm telling you, the gentleman gave 2-3 days after intervention, he gave his life to Christ. And his sister, who is a Muslim, that was taking care of him, their family, the first day they said, you cannot pray from here. The last time I visited, they said, can you pray for us? When you come here, could you share scriptures with us? And this is like a staunch Muslim, everyone is covered up and all that. And so the moment we look beyond ourselves and reach out, I think we get a better perspective. And so I think for me it's such a hard tension, because at the end of the day I don't know when to stop, but I tell you, it's more life-giving reaching out than feeling sorry for yourself. And then also find community that are like-minded. Sometimes it feels like people are not there, people are not out there, but actually some people are there willing, just waiting for you to press the button to say, okay, this is what I want to say, and they're open. And so it's important for us to have community. And I think for me that has been the blessing of being part of RZIM, where I have a community where I can go and vent out whatever.
You need that kind of space. Absolutely.
Because at the end of the day, everyone is lost in, oh wow, that's amazing, that's really amazing. And if someone knows, that is 1 or 2 people, let's strategize, we can do better. And so you need people that are loving enough to honestly call it out from you. And sometimes when you find yourself in those places. It may be hard to pray, but again, it gives you a chance to get people to pray with you. And finding things that energize you. I'm into movies and into hikes. I would take walks as long as for 5 hours just to kind of like get my head straight. And so I think it manifests differently for different people, but whatever it is, make sure you are, but then also constantly reminding ourselves of God's love and what he has done for us, and what he has given. Sometimes even when it looks very little, like trust him that the one that has offered today, he owns tomorrow. Yeah. And maybe also having an internal perspective. I think for me, the most amazing thing about the Christian faith is that I will see Jesus. And I know that can be a very, very tough thing to tell people that are into very deep pains, but actually that's the reality of our faith, that the one day we'll see the King. So for me, 1 Corinthians 15, one of my favorite, that assurance, the death has been defeated, that we're incorruptible bodies. And I just look forward to that time. So even when the things seem very hard and they seem not to have a hope, we can have the hope in Jesus, who says in John 14, do not let your hearts be troubled, believe in me and believe in my Father, and all that he is going to prepare for us. So from way as a young child, I've always believed that, and until now, every day it grows stronger, that but because I've seen his faithfulness, even when I've not been faithful.
That's so good, Rachael. Thank you so much for that. I love how you tied it together with that eternality of God at the end, because I think we live in the type of world that has emptied that word of such incredible anticipation, because we are so faced by things right now that are so urgent. And so the idea of eternity is something that can sound quite annoying, because it seems so far off, especially with a lot of things that are staring us in the face. So much pain, so much tragedy, and obviously now we're all in the middle of a pandemic. But that eternal perspective, I think also it's useful for us right now to give us a reason for why we should exert ourselves and live lives that exhibit the kingdom of God, and also lives where, like you're saying, we don't just live for ourselves, but we live towards the direction of other people, just like Jesus would have, right? Whether it's sharing the story of our good God and how he's come to make a way for us to be friends with him again, or how we are actually mobilizing to support a community so that they can have a different experience in comparison to what they're having, whether that's in, food or advocacy and whatever. And I think you really have embodied that for me, Rachael. I really want to say thank you so much. And I love you, and I'm so thankful that I get to witness your life. And I hope everybody also got to learn from this time that I had with Rachael. We were supposed to do an Instagram live earlier, but I'm trying to see if I can quickly convince Rachael so that she can encourage people to see this video. Thank you so much for everybody that has spent time with us. Definitely hope to see you again when we have someone else on the show. And actually, on the show. Actually, I need Rachael to come back. Because there are other things that have stirred up in my heart from this conversation. And I also know that you picked up Emmanuel Katangole's. You listened to something he was preaching, right?
Yeah. No, I definitely love that. I loved, like I said, I've always had kind of like a negative picture of lament, and partly that's part of my story. You were not supposed to, expose negative emotion or anything. So I'm one of the those people that I really like a stoic kind of him and how he expresses lament, because actually, as much as I hate to say that I have a lot of lamentation and all that, but today I think as I was listening to him, he gave like a positive connotation towards lamentation, where he says that lamentation gives voice to grief. Yes. And then he says it helps us speak the things that cannot be uttered by the mouth. but then also it gives us hope. And actually, when I was thinking about it, I remembered a poem that I'd read from Scars Across Humanity, of a poem of a lady that was brutally raped in the Congo, and she expresses herself, how the experience is. But then at the end of the poem, she says, "But I'll turn my gaze, to the face of love," something like that. "I'll turn my gaze to the face of love," and like, I should read it for you. She says,
"Please read it for us."
Yeah, but I am learning to erase that gaze and seek instead the gentle face of love, which stoops to soothe my fear with tender touch on the long journey towards peace. The first part of the poem, it's more like, oh, this is what happened. This is how hatred engulfed my soul, and that. But then it's like, I am learning to erase that gaze and fix myself, to the face of love, to the gentle face of love. And I thought that is powerful, and I think, again, lament gives us that, a chance to turn our gaze onto Christ, who can solve all these problems.
See, that I would love to get in on that with you some more, as well as get into the sacrifice of Africa with Katangole. Firstly, because he's actually Ugandan Rwandan. He's a half Ugandan, half Rwandan, and so he's got such incredible insight in terms of the Christian ethics, and the nation of Africa. And so anyway, I love your mind, and so I'd love to dig into that with you. Rachael, thank you so much. If you could just say goodbye to everybody.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today, and thank you so much, Lucy, for hosting me. Surely I had a good time, and always a pleasure learning from you. And yeah, keep shining.
Keep shining. In fact, I was just going to say that if there are any questions that you have for Rachael, I know that she has to come back. She has a unique perspective. She's a Black woman, African woman, doing work she's also doing gender studies with
Makerere University.
Makerere University, top university in Uganda. So please, can you...
Top university in East Africa.
Top university in East Africa, Ville.
And East and Central Africa.
East and Central, whole belt in Japan. So she's doing gender studies at Makerere University. Any questions related to that, I would love for Rachael to come back and to just hash through some of those, and even give us frameworks. And if there's anything that she's reading that you would love to get into, please let me know. I just wanted you to meet her. Thank you so much, Rachael, for coming. Thank you for everybody tuning in, and I hope to see you again next time.